guys, welcome back to the Review Diaries. I'm your host, Jackie Moore, and in today's episode, we are finally going to be recapping the second book in A Court of Thorns and Roses, so A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. And because it's such a long book and so much happens in it, we are just going to get straight into it. I'm not going to make this like a super long intro like I usually do. And I'm also going to be splitting this book recap into two parts because I don't want to make this episode like 2 hours long. I'm going to try and keep it like as short as possible. So yeah, let's just go right into it and pick up where we left off with the first book. So the first book ends right after everyone gets out of Under the Mountain, and it is Feyre with Tamlin returning to the Spring Court. So the second book begins 3 months after the events of Under the Mountain and their escape. So they have now returned to the Spring Court and been there for 3 months, and Feyre has been kind of having recurring nightmares for the past 3 months. So she wakes up in the middle of the night just throwing up, and Tamlin is just basically unfazed or just does not react really to kind of her struggles that she is going through with everything that she experienced. And I mean, he kind of experienced his own trauma in a way, but as far as like being there for her and supporting her and kind of helping her through all of that, he's not really like super supportive. And she's also having to just adjust to no longer being a human and being in this new fairy body, and then all that just comes with it because she also just has all these like crazy immense powers that a lot of fae don't usually have. She, as we remember, was revived by all of the 7 High Lords of Prythian, and they kind of, when they revived her, gave each of them gave her like a kernel of their power, which is already like immense in itself. So just multiply that times 7 and you just have this like super powerful and badass like new fae female, and I just love it. But she's just, you know, going through it, and she also has not heard from Rhysand in the 3 months that she has been back in the Spring Court. So really the only reminder that she has of him is the bargain tattoo that he put on her when they made the bargain, when they were in the basically in the little prison, I guess. And like I said, Tamlin has also been having nightmares similar to Feyre, but just does not really open up to her about it. He kind of just acts like nothing's going on and doesn't really like want to keep her in the loop with what is going on with him personally either. They don't really talk about what they experienced with one another and their feelings since leaving Under the Mountain. And also, Tamlin proposed to Feyre shortly after coming back from Under the Mountain, so they have been preparing for their wedding ever since they came back. So Ianthe, a high priestess that is also a childhood friend of Tamlin's, has been helping Feyre with the preparations for the wedding. So in the Spring Court, they have this tradition called the tithe, which is basically where twice a year members of the Spring Court pay basically like taxes, and regardless of their title or status, like in the Spring Court, it is offered in exchange for protection and help whenever Tamlin can offer it to them. So this would basically be one of Feyre's duties if she were to marry Tamlin. And if someone doesn't pay the tithe, Tamlin can basically like punish them in whatever form he chooses to do so. And we also in this time learn a little bit more about Lucian's backstory when he opens up to Feyre about his father murdering a girl that he loved, and he says that Tamlin will do whatever possible to prevent that from happening to Feyre again, even if it means keeping secrets from her or imposing rules on her that she does not necessarily agree with, which is a recurring theme in kind of her journey throughout this book and her relationship with Tamlin. During all of these preparations for the wedding, Feyre is really just kind of struggling and kind of just going through the motions, not only with just being in her new body, but just being back in the Spring Court after all the trauma that they experienced. So having to cope with murdering those two Feyre, recurring nightmares that she's having, and also just new duties that would be expected of her if she were to marry Tamlin. So it's just a lot is going on in her mind, and she doesn't really know how to cope with any of it. And also her partner is not really speaking to her about like any of this or really acknowledging what she is going through, and she's kind of just like going through the motions and just coping with whatever way she can. Shortly after this, it is time for Tamlin and Feyre's wedding, and Feyre has literally the just ugliest wedding dress and she hates it, so she's honestly just really panicking about the whole situation too, not just the wedding dress but just everything. So she just feels really broken and depressed inside and feels like everyone around her is judging her because of what she had to do and just for her being a human too, I guess. So constantly in her mind we see her looking at herself as this murderer, and as she is walking up to where she is going to say her vows to Tamlin and marry him, she reaches for him, but she feels like she is going to vomit and feels like this vow is going to tie her and Tamlin forever, and she doesn't feel like she's ever going to get better or get out of this depression that she is experiencing, and that she is just always going to feel this way. So in her mind, she kind of starts saying like, oh my God, help me, like somebody get me out, somebody help me. And so as Tamlin tries to approach her, everyone kind of starts noticing that she is kind of rethinking the whole situation. And then in the background, we just hear thunder, and it is freaking Rhysand coming to just save the day because he heard Feyre through the bond begging for help. So he makes his grand entrance and arrives to take Feyre to the night court with him as part of their bargain that they made under the mountain. And so obviously Tamlin is just pissed that he is arriving in the middle of their freaking wedding and is trying to stop him from taking her. And Rhysand makes a joke of like, oh, am I like interrupting something? But he takes her away and they arrive in the night court. So she thinks that this is just the most beautiful city that she's ever seen, and she can't believe that there's like an actual place that exists like this that is basically untouched because of what everyone else in Prythian has experienced since Amarantha. So they are in Rhys's townhouse and he's like, you're welcome. And she's like, for what? So he tells her that he heard her begging through the bond for someone to save her. So she obviously denies it, but he's like, nope, I heard you through the bond, so like don't even try to deny it. So he also knows that Feyre has been like throwing up her guts every single night, and just kind of how Tamlin has been dismissing the whole situation, and tells her that her wedding dress is hideous too, which I thought was just so Rhysand, and I loved it. And he basically tells her that she is not a prisoner in his home, but she is a guest. And after this, they bicker a little bit, and it's the scene where she throws her shoes at his head, and she somehow nails him in the head one time. So I thought that was funny. And after this, Feyre is having basically a rough night being away from the home that she knows, and she basically just falls asleep sobbing. And the next morning, while having breakfast with Rhysand, he tells her that he wants her to learn how to read, because he's like, well, if you're going to marry a High Lord, you have to learn how to like read, because you're going to be writing like correspondence and all that stuff. So he just makes a little joke out of it, but I thought it was cute that he was trying to teach her how to read too. And obviously Feyre is like, no thank you, I don't want your help. And as they are talking, Mor arrives. So she is Rhys's cousin, and she is part of his inner circle. And after a brief introduction, Feyre and Rhys are having a reading lesson together. And while he is trying to help her learn, he goes into her mind. And so she obviously does not like the fact that he is doing this, but he's also trying to teach her how to put her mental shields up as part of her new Fae powers to avoid people from going into her mind and reading what she is thinking and just like prying into her thoughts and everything that she knows. In the room that they are, there is a large map, one much like the one that Tamlin had in the spring court. And Rhys notices Feyre looking at it, and they start having a conversation about the impending war that is going to happen on humans. So Feyre thinks that Rhys is the one that is going to invade the mortal lands, and he takes offense to her accusation since it's actually the king of Hybern. So he wants to reclaim the human lands and maybe even take the fairy lands for himself too. Feyre asks Rhys if he fought in the war, so we kind of get to see part of Rhys's backstory at this time. And so when he was young, he did fight, but he said that he was not interested in seeing slaughter like that ever again, so he would not try to take part of it if he could avoid it. And so because of Feyre's powers that she was given by the High Lords when she was brought back to life, he says that she could basically destroy herself if she didn't learn how to control her powers. But he says that she could also play an important role in the war if she chooses. So the end of their week together comes, and it's time for Feyre to go back to the spring court, and they winnow into it, which is some form of like teleportation that Illyrian warriors can do as part of their powers. So immediately when Lucien and Tamlin see her, he's like, "Are you alright? Are you hurt?" Like, but she's obviously literally fine. So Tamlin literally trashed like half of the house, and there were claw marks everywhere, and he basically presses her for information about the night court and everything that happened while she was there. Feyre has basically one day with Tamlin to spend together with him before he heads off to the border of the spring court. When he leaves, and he tells Feyre that she will have guards watching her at all times and that she's only to stay in the castle grounds while he is gone. She basically spends like her entire week that he is away throwing up in the middle of the night and still having nightmares. So it's a week later and the tithe arrives, and it's Feyre's first time in the ceremony. So people do their offerings and like they're supposed to do each year. And then there's a water wraith who comes up who was supposed to offer fish, but there weren't any fish in the lake. So Tamlin tells her that they have 3 days to present an offering, or they will have to double it for next month. But Feyre doesn't like his reaction, and she's basically like, well, we don't need her fish, so why are we making her give some if she already said that they don't have any? Like, what's the difference and why make them suffer? And he's basically like, well, it is what it is. And if I ever have a son, that's the way that it is going to be, because my family did it that way. So Feyre storms off, and she runs after the fairy and asks her how much gold she needs, and she gives her some jewelry, basically like worth what she was supposed to give with the fish. And the fairy is very grateful to her, and she says that she will not forget this kindness from her. So at dinner, there is noticeable tension between Feyre and Lucien a little bit, but mostly Tamlin. So she kind of asks what is wrong, but it's obviously Tamlin who knows that Feyre gave the fairy jewelry, and he is upset about it. So he says that she is undermining the laws of his court, and that it makes his court look weak when she does things like that. So she claps back at him and tells him that he doesn't know what it's like to be hungry and have no money and a family to feed, and he doesn't understand what that's like, basically. So Lucien tries to stick up for Feyre, but Tamlin snaps at him, and in this moment, Feyre's powers allow her to basically come outside of her body as if she were another person to get into Lucien's head by slipping into his mental walls. And she, I guess, did it as like a knee-jerk reaction because she wanted him to defend himself, but obviously he didn't do so. He didn't speak up for himself. He just kind of like backed down, but she wanted him to do so. And it was kind of, I guess, her powers like manifesting in that moment because she wanted that to happen. So after this, Tamlin gives Feyre some paint and asks him if she is ever going to be able to basically roam free in her own house that she is living in without an escort, to be able to paint whatever she wants, which is just like such a wild thing to say, to be basically confined in your own home and to just be constantly watched. So I understand that he's doing it for her safety and everything, but he's also not giving her the tools to be able to protect or defend herself, and is just confining her here when she wants to help and learn how to defend herself. So she basically tells him to marry somebody else who is going to be able to put up with all of this, and she feels like she is drowning in this relationship. So her power basically explodes in this moment, and she shatters the windows, the furniture, and the paint that he had just given her. And so she makes this sort of like physical shield between her and Tamlin due to her magic exploding in the room to kind of, I guess, like protect herself. And he is apologizing profusely, like through the shield, saying that he is going to try to be better and ask if they can like move on from the situation. So she gives in, and the shield disappears as they hug. So some days pass, and Tamlin is in and out of the castle, leaving Feyre to just be on her own, still refusing to give answers as to what is going on. But one morning Feyre wakes up to the sound of voices in the hallway outside of her room, and it is Rhysand again, just like popping in. And so as soon as he sees her, he notices how skinny she is again and makes a comment about that and tells her that it's time for them to leave. So as soon as they are back in his townhouse, he asks that she have breakfast with him because he immediately just wants to make sure that she is taken care of, since she is obviously skinnier than the last time that they saw each other. And he tells her too that during this time he would kind of tug on the bond just to like check on her, because he could barely feel her. I guess her like spirit or her soul was kind of fading, and she just was not really like as alive as she used to be, because she's so like just depressed about everything that's going on and how she's feeling. And he leaves her some books to entertain herself with while he is away, and ensures that she has servants to keep her company, so she is not alone, because he has to be away for most of the time that they are supposed to be like there for that week. So pretty quickly their time together is up. She basically just spends the whole time reading by herself while he is away, and she has to return to the spring court. And after this, Tamlin has to leave yet again to go to the border, as this new threat has broken out, and Feyre wants to come with him, but he says that it's too dangerous, and she keeps insisting, and she has this like inner monologue with herself of how her older self died under the mountain, and that she no longer needs protection or coddling, that there has been no one to really kind of protect her from the torture when she was killed but brought back to life. So she is kind of reaching a breaking point in her frustration with him, and he's just really not hearing any of what she is saying or really trying to do anything to help her. So he's just really kind of letting her succumb further and further into this depression and leaving her to her own devices. And I understand that he is dealing with his own thing and trauma from it, and then also trying to manage his court and protect his people and do all this stuff. But his partner is literally just like crying for help, and she is falling apart at the seams, literally on like the last thread possible that she could be holding on to, and yet she still wants to be a part of protecting his court and his people, to at least just feel useful and not feel like this fragile thing that he is treating her like. And so they are kind of going back and forth with one another, and he puts up this invisible shield as like an ultimatum throughout the entire mansion, so she can't leave and she's unable to break through it. So he takes off with Lucien, locking her in the house, And so with her trapped, she basically starts having this panic attack and feeling kind of like she used to when she was under the mountain. And her power basically envelops her in this like darkness, and the servants are kind of yelling for her because they don't know what's going on. They just see her like trapped in this darkness, but she feels someone like basically grab her and carry her, and she recognizes that it is more. So they leave the mansion, and she is soon passed onto Rhysand's arms, and she is basically just like it passed out. So she wakes up in Rhysand's house, and he is sitting in a chair across from her, and she doesn't know how long she's been unconscious for, and she asks him what happened. So he says that she was screaming and that she wrapped herself in some sort of like protective magic, and he was able to smash the shield that Tamlin set and sent more to go get her. Says that she is basically under no obligation to go back unless she wants to, but she can stay as long as she wants until she figures it out, like whatever is going on with her life. And she tells him that she's not going back anytime soon until she figures all of this out. So he tells her to rest for a couple of days and that he will be back at the end of the week because he has some business to take care of in a different part of his lands, and she wants to go with him. So he says that if he takes her, that she must not tell anybody what she sees, what she does, or who she meets, and if she is to return to the Spring Court. And then she asks where they are going, and so it is VELARIS, the secret city that Rhysand has safeguarded for his people and his inner circle, who are basically his family. And so they arrive in his townhouse in VELARIS, and the house has all these kinds of shields and wards, so only Rhysand and more are able to winnow into the house, and only those who she wishes may enter the house. And he reassures her that she is safe in the townhouse and in the city, that the walls have not been breached for like 5,000 years. So we hear Cassian and Amren on the other side of the door, since Rhysand is making sure that Feyre feels comfortable enough to be introduced to them, but she decides not to, and to just head to her room so she can rest. And so this obviously disappoints Rhysand, and she notices how excited he is for her to meet his friends, but decides not to because she's just tired of everything that's been going on. So she keeps hearing voices and conversations going on as she enters the room, and asks the maids who these people are. And we learn that they're Rhysand's inner circle, who are basically like his family and the closest people to him in his court. And so Feyre wakes up hours later and heads down to meet Rhysand as he is waiting for her to leave. So as they are exiting the house, Feyre notices just how peaceful this city is, and that everyone seems happy. They don't fear Rhysand. As he walks by, he shows her the House of Wind in the distance and tells her that this is where they will be having dinner that night. Feyre makes a comment to him about if he ever thought to do the same as he did for the city for others, since the rest of the continent is basically destroyed. But he says that VELARIS has remained a secret for basically forever, which is why it's remained untouched. So VELARIS isn't like anything that Feyre has ever seen before. There's like stores, music, and people just kind of living their lives in peace, and they're happy. People aren't starving, and they just feel protected and safe. So as they are walking in town, people approach them to greet Rhysand and welcome him back home. And she notices how he knew everyone by name, and they addressed him by his name too. So it was much more informal than anything that she had seen before. Feyre suddenly grows tired from their walk, and she notices how her magic sort of starts bubbling in anger at watching all these people basically being able to live their lives in peace while the rest of the world just suffered. But Rhysand breaks her out of it and talks her down, saying that his people are not at fault for any of this, and they are not to blame, and that she shouldn't take her anger out on them. So after this, they're going to have dinner with Cassian, Azriel, Amren, and more. So this is where we learn what each of them does in his court. So Amren is his second in command, Mora is his third, and he reveals that he is also the most powerful High Lord in history. And she has this moment in her mind where she kind of waits for fear or anxiety to kick in at the prospect of having dinner with him and his friends. And she also just has a little moment where she thinks that it would be a mercy if she were to die. So Rhys is in her mind, and when she is thinking this, he breaks her out of it and says that she shouldn't think like that. And in this moment, she flashes from her body to his, like she did with Lucian, so she can see what she looks like from his perspective. So she is skinny, her face is really dull, and there's no like real joy or life in her eyes. He asks her how she was able to get through his mental shields, but she says that she just kind of slipped through. And he asks her how many minds that she's just managed to slip into, and she says that only Lucian is the first one. So it is now time for dinner with his inner circle, and he says that they either have to climb the 10,000 steps to get to the House of Wind, or fly in, which she doesn't want to do. So he promises that he won't drop her or let the wind destroy her hair, because she says that the maid spent hours on it. So he says that the moment that she wants to leave, that they will, that it's really just her choice, and she had never really been given a choice for anything when it came to being with Tamlin. So she agrees before they can even finish his sentence. He picks her up and flies her to the House of Wind. So when they land, she has this little moment where she opens up to him, saying that she felt like she was a fool, and that she felt like she fell in love with the first person that showed her kindness, and that he knew that and abused it. So this is when we finally get to meet Cassian, Mor, Amren, and Azriel all together. And so, as you may or may not know, Cassian is my favorite ACOTAR man. Like, I will literally die for him. Love that man so much. But he introduces himself to Feyre with a joke about how they don't bite unless asked, to try and kind of break the tension with her a little bit. And she describes him as rough and Azriel as this more classic kind of beautiful, which I think just fits him like perfectly with the fan art that I've seen of him. I think it just is perfect. So Cassian is the one who commands Rhys's armies, and Azriel is his spy master. So as he is extending his hand out to Feyre to shake it, she notices that his hand is very scarred, as if it were burned. So she notices the stones on both Azriel and Cassian, which are siphons that help them kind of harness their Illyrian powers. So Azriel's are cobalt blue and Cassian's are red. And after this, Mora comes into the room, and Amren follows shortly after. And she is pretty short and has silver eyes and then black hair. And I think it's described that she has like straight black hair. And I think most people that I've seen fan art of her have drawn her to have like maybe Asian features. And as they're sitting at the table, Amren is kind of sizing up Feyre, and then she happens to sniff her, and there's this like surprised expression on her face, to which Rhys kind of acknowledges that little moment with her, but more on that later. And she calls her maid, so it's a mortal soul in an immortal body, which is what she is too. Feyre asks how the three of them met, and it was at an Illyrian training camp. So Azriel was sent because he is a shadow singer, which is basically just someone that is super stealthy and in tune with what other people feel or hear, which most people can't. And he also has these like dark shadows around him all the time. So Rhys is half Illyrian, and his mother was lowborn and worked as a seamstress in one of the camps. So female Illyrians get their wings clipped when they come of age. So Rhys's mother tried to halt her maturing as much as she could, but was eventually discovered, and as they were going to clip her wings, his father winnowed into the camp, and they have this thing called the mating bond, but it's basically when two people are just destined to be together, and it just kind of clicks somehow when you meet your mate. And they locked eyes, and he saved her from having her wings clipped. So they married, and then Rhys was brought to one of the camps when he was 8 to train. And he met Cassian shortly after, and Rhys basically helped Cassian since he had no one looking out for him. And then they met Azriel a year later, and they basically all just grew up together, training together and just getting stronger. So Rhys's father came to the camp 20 years later and separated all of them, and since the 3 of them posed a pretty large threat, they only saw each other a couple of times. And so afterwards they ask Feyre about her and her life and how she grew up. So she tells them about her sisters and her parents, and how her mother died when she was 8, and then how their father lost all their money, and how she basically had to take care of her entire family because no one else would, for 5 years until she met Tamlin. So it's at this moment that Feyre accepts Rhys's offer to work with him and to help with the King of Hybern. So Rhys tells the entire table how the King of Hybern intends to resurrect Jurian, who is the soul that is imprisoned in Amarantha's ring with his eye. And Amren tells them they have to go to the bone carver in the prison for information on how to defeat Jurian and the King of Hybern. So when they are back in the townhouse, Feyre asks Rhys what the cost was to keep VELARIS a secret, which was basically being enslaved to Amarantha. And he basically used whatever he could of his powers to make sure everyone forgot about VELARIS and about his inner circle, and then used the rest of his powers to shield everyone in VELARIS from sight and sound. And he explained how he's had to live with the consequences, knowing that there were people who weren't offered the same protection and suffered because of it. And so that night, Feyre is having a nightmare, and while still in the dream, she says that she hears someone far away screaming her name, which is actually Rhysand telling her to open her eyes and wake up. So she wakes up and sees that she has claws, a flame that she has basically used to shred the sheets and linens and burn them. So she runs to the bathroom to throw up, and he's right there behind her to soothe her and help her, unlike Tamlin, who turned a blind eye to everything while she struggled. And so the next morning, Amren is standing at the foot of her bed, and she gives her an amulet which she says protected her when she was in the prison, so she can borrow it when they go in, but that if she keeps it, that she will basically go to the ends of the earth to find her. And so as they are making their way to the prison, Feyre asks Rhys about Azriel's scars. So basically he was tortured by his father, and they would keep him in this dark cell, and they would only let him out for like an hour a day to see his mother because he was an illegitimate son. And so when he was 8, his brothers mixed like oil and fire and poured it on his hands, which caused the scars. And so as they reach the bone carver's cell, he appears as this little boy to Feyre with blue eyes. So Rhys literally throws him a bone as an offering to be allowed into his cell, which he accepts and lets them inside. So he asks where she went when she died, but she counters and says that they will do a question for a question. And she says that she felt her neck snap, and that after that everything just kind of went dark, but that there was this tether that allowed her to see everything that was going on through Rhys's eyes, and that the only thing keeping her there was their bond to one another. And so their bond felt like her home was on the other side, and it was a light that she followed, and that she only wanted to return to those that she loved. And she asked if there was a way to resurrect someone who does not have a physical body, whose soul is preserved, but he says that no, there isn't a way, unless the magic of the cauldron is used. So Rhys asks where the cauldron is hidden, and the bone carver says that it basically vanished from its last hiding place, and he implies that Rhys has known all along who has the cauldron, and that he was just looking for a confirmation that it was the King of Hybern. So Rhys asks if there is a way to nullify its power, to which the bone carver answers that when it was made, a book called the Book of Breathings was forged, which contained words that could nullify its power to control it, but it was split into two pieces, and that one part was given to the Fae and another to the 6 human queens as part of the treaty with the humans. So no one born of this earth could wield it, but something reforged, like Feyre, could. The half possessed by the human queens must be given freely, but if both halves were reunited, they could nullify its powers. And so they return to the townhouse, where Azriel says that he will work on getting information on where the Book of Breathings is, to try and figure out where the other part is being kept in the human lands also. But Rhys says that there is no need, that they will go to Hybern to either take the cauldron or nullify it with the book. And he also says that Feyre must be able to use her powers and find the half of the book in the summer court, but that they must test her abilities first. And he suggests retrieving this object from the Weaver's trove that belonged to him, and also suggests making Feyre an emissary to the human world to gain the trust of humans at their family's estate. And so Feyre and Rhysand head to the Weaver's cottage to retrieve the object that he wanted as a test for her, and Rhys tells her that she is blind but has very lethal sense of hearing. So when she gets there, the Weaver is singing a song that is almost like a riddle, but Feyre steps inside carefully as to not make any noise, and while she is searching for the object, which turns out to be a ring, she stretches out her hand and she grabs it, but the Weaver hears her and, through her magic, closes all of the doors. And so Feyre starts panicking, and she grabs a candle that is burning but throws it at her to distract the Weaver, causing her to scream wherever she threw the fire to put it out. She sees this chimney that she tries to climb out of and manages to fit because she's so small and skinny. But the Weaver hears her, but Feyre manages to throw a brick that was loose at her and keeps climbing out until she escapes. So Rhys is outside literally chilling on a tree branch, which I thought was just the craziest thing, and he's just out there just chilling, waiting for her. And before she can yell at him, he takes her away and flies with her in her arms. So back at the townhouse, Rhys allows Feyre into his mind, and this is where we learn that he knows Ianthe and that she had some sort of past with her, and that she was basically pursuing Rhys to unite the priestesses in Prythian, and wanted to either have his baby marry him or just kind of unite them. But he rejected her advances and had forbidden her from touching anyone in his court or from pursuing anyone anymore. And so after this, everyone heads to the human lands to Feyre's family estate. So the guys are glamored and they can't see them, but Elaine sees Feyre when she is at the door and immediately is just emotional and starts crying when she sees her, and they are now inside the house, and Nesta is on the stairs, and she looks like she's basically seeing a ghost when she sees that Feyre is now a fae. Feyre asks where their father is, but they say that he is trading away with some merchants. So Feyre is wearing a hood, which she lets down at this time to reveal her fae ears, which are still a shock to her sisters, and she tells them about her dying and then coming back to life and being remade into a fae, and tells them kind of as much as she can about what happened under the mountain and why they're actually there, which is just the threat that Hybern poses to the human world and Prythian. So immediately Nesta is like, go somewhere else. I don't want any of your kind here. But Elaine tries to play mediator and says that they can keep it a secret and send the servants away when they have their meetings. And it's like the least that they could do for everything that Feyre gave up, and that they can help now. And I was like, look at her go. Like, her finally speaking up and trying to help, even if it's like just a little bit. Just thank you. At least a little bit. Just trying to like be just the smidge helpful, which neither one of you have been at this point, like at all. So thank you. I was very proud of her. So Elaine manages to send the staff away so Rhys, Asriel, and Cassian can stop hiding. And Feyre makes an apprehensive introduction to everybody so everyone can meet each other. And bless the girls because they do try. But of course they are just terrified that these huge Fey men with wings and swords are there. And so they have this like dinner set up, but human food does not taste the same to them. Feyre says it tastes like ash. So Nesta's like, well, do you not like the food? Are you like too good for human food now? And I was like, oh god. So of course they start fighting again, and Feyre basically says that she can do everything she did as a human but better. Nesta basically bites Cassian's head off because he's just looking at her, and she's like, what are you looking at? And he's like, well, someone who let their younger sister risk their life every day to provide for them while you did nothing. And I was like, oh god. So he says that Feyre died to save his people when it wasn't even like her choice, and that he's not going to sit there and let Nesta insult his people in the process. And Nesta is just like, she's just shook that someone like snapped back at her, and I was like, yes. So Elaine, obviously sweet girl, says that it's hard because they were just raised to think like this, and they've heard stories their entire lives about them harming humans like Claire Better. And Nesta tells them to write a letter to the queens, and that her and Elaine will send them and hope that they will come to meet with them. So they decide to spend the night at their house, and Feyre and Rhysand share a room for the night. So the next morning, Feyre and Rhysand are beginning with her training, but she says that she can't concentrate with him there, so she heads off by herself. So an hour later, she finds a note from Rhysand, and he asks her how everything is going, and he compliments her handwriting and says that life is better when she's around. So it's a cute moment, but of course it's ruined because Feyre is literally snatched by the freaking adder. So in no time, Rhys is there to save Feyre, and the adder says that he was sent by the King of Hybern to get Feyre, and so Asriel arrives afterwards and takes the adder before vanishing to make him a prisoner. And so after this, Feyre writes a letter to Tamlin where she says that she left of her own free will and that she is safe and to not look for her because she is not going back to the Spring Court. So back in VELARIS, Rhys and Feyre are walking the streets of the town when Feyre hears music like that was played in her cell in Under the Mountain. So she realizes that it was Rhysand that sent music to her and says that she saw the Night Court and thanks him for everything that he has done for her. So it's a sweet moment between them. Cassian and Feyre are now training, and he asks her about the letter that she sent to Tamlin. And he says that the only reason that they know is because they just needed to prepare their forces just in case. And he didn't mean to ask or pry into her business. So while they are like talking about this and working on her training, we get this internal monologue with Feyre where she's basically just kind of processing all of her feelings for Tamlin and just the whole situation, and how she's basically done everything possible for Tamlin to just be with him, to protect him, because she loved him and he has really kind of done nothing. Like when Amarantha killed her and he only kind of begged for Feyre's sake, but never actually fought for her, and really kind of only put up a fight when being territorial against Rhysand, and how he locked her up, and before we know it, she breaks down and she's crying and she's kind of burned through the pads that they were using for training. And my man Cassian, he's like still taking the punches, even though she's probably burning his hands, and he's like, it's okay, it's literally fine. And I was like, ugh. So she breaks down and says that it should have been her that died. So immediately she's just like enveloped in this darkness, which is just Rhysand protecting her and comforting her in this moment, which I thought, it was like one of my favorite moments like in the book, because it's just so sweet. And we just see how much he cares for her and wants her to be okay and protected. And so after this, we see Rhysand, Amren, and Feyre head to Adriata to try and retrieve the first half of the Book of Breathings. And we meet Daddy Tarquin, who is the High Lord of the Summer Court. And yeah, I thought this would be like a good stopping point for this first part, just because so many other things happen, and it's like, it is like halfway through the book too. So yes. So yeah, I'm very excited to get back into this series again, even though I like literally like put out the first episode of the first book like 2 months ago, but it's just, they're just so long and there's so much that happens and so many details that I just want to make sure that I am covering everything that I can as much as I can. So yeah, I had to split it because I'm not making these episodes like 2 hours long, and I knew that that's what was going to happen. So I'm going to try and get the second part up as soon as possible so we can just keep going. I'm recording like multiple episodes today, and I'm doing 2 other things that are completely different to just have them ready in batches. And yeah, I'm excited to be out of Bridgerton mode and doing some other stuff, some new stuff that is just exciting and fun that I like. So if you enjoyed this episode, do not forget to like and subscribe, comment, rate, leave a review, follow me on social media. Still trying my best to just work out a schedule to get like social media content up, but it's just so hard to like try and figure it out. But it's going as well as I could hope it would, with as little promo as I'm doing. So thank you so much to anyone who has listened. Like I said, if you enjoyed this episode, please do not forget to check out my other stuff too. I have playlists linked below. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll have some other stuff linked at the end. But if not, if you're listening on a podcast platform, just go check out my other stuff. I have the first part of ACOTAR, so the first book, plenty of Bridgerton TV shows and movies and stuff, but slowly but surely trying to roll into some other stuff, which is exciting and just more motivating to do more stuff. So yes, thank you very much if you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.